Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahi Tejasvinavaditam Stumavitvishavai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor, and may our study be full of illumination. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So Gita Jayanti is today, but also St. John of the Cross. So difficult to know what subject to choose. But it seems that we have to talk about a subject we're all interested in, and that is happiness. Finding happiness. When we say finding happiness, I suppose as an assumption, we don't have it. For some years now, there's been an index, happiness index. They tell me that Denmark is the happiest country on the planet. I don't know how they established that, because if you go to Denmark, you don't find people jumping up and down and celebrating outrageously. So that is rather more contentment than happiness. So how do we define happiness? And most people have moments of happiness, there's no doubt. But you see, in all the movement toward some kind of fulfillment, be it power or wisdom, primarily we all want happiness. So when a person follows a certain principle that doesn't engage the source of misery, no doubt will find happiness. There's a story about a man who had a conversation with God. So he says, "Oh Lord, 1,000,000 human years, how is it registered for you?" God says, "A second." He says, "What about a million euros? How would you register 1,000,000 euros? And God says, "It's a cent." And the man says, "All right." He says, "Please, can you give me one of those cents?" And God says, "Wait a second." I'll just be a second. So you see, we want this eternally, but what it means, of course, is that we have moments of happiness when things are going well. But when things are not going so well, our whole mood gets dragged down. How to keep it up? If it were something like a football or something, how to push it up, and when it comes down, how to keep it going. But even more so, how to stop it coming down in the first place. So what I often say is, everybody has moments of happiness. You ask, are you happy? Yes. But it's only because your back is not paining, or your bank account is full and you have no financial woes, or somebody praised you nicely and you like it. As soon as somebody says something that you don't like, immediately, like a balloon, all the air gets let out and you deflate. What is the source of all our problems and all our difficulties? And this question of happiness and what to do about it is a central theme in all the scriptures. 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita tells us, or gives us a definition. It tells us that yoga is actually the separation of the joint or the junction with pain. The severance of pain, that's how it's defined in the Bhagavad Gita. It says, "Tam vidyat dukkha samyoga va viyogam yoga samnitam." Let the severance from the connection with pain be known by the name of yoga. Sanishayina yuktavyo yoga nivina chetasa. This yoga should be practiced. What yoga? This separation from pain. It should be practiced with perseverance and without depression. In other words, in practicing, we shouldn't put so much effort in that it becomes an uphill battle and becomes a very antithesis of the severance of pain. It becomes a painful pursuit in itself. St. John of the Cross was a 15th century Spanish mystic. From a very young age, he had an inclination toward generosity, purity, devotion. And so he was inspired by Teresa of Avila. Teresa of Avila was a very inspiring mystic. She felt that in her own monastic order, there was too much luxury, so she originated a decalcified, that is shoeless. People should not wear shoes. And so she wanted a stricter order of discipline. Then you might say, but discipline, if we're looking for happiness, even in the spiritual life, especially in the spiritual life, why do we have to go through penance and pain and torture and all of that? And the answer is that we have to give a different direction to things. And that direction will be not familiar to us. It'll be new territory. Swami Vivekananda puts it in this way in his Raja Yoga. Making new channels, making new roadways, new pathways in the brain. Naturally, it'll create resistance. But what is the alternative? The Kathopanishad that we've been studying on Saturday gives a choice. Nachiketa, the very young boy, full of faith, bold enough to ask this question. So what is it? What happens after death? Please tell me that. Please tell me the key to immortality. Please tell me that condition, in effect, where there is no grief. And his teacher, the Lord of Death, Yama, nicely instructs him and says, oh, don't ask that one. Not even the Devas would ask that one or know this one. No, he gives us a choice, and the choice is clearly to us. I'm saying he gives us a choice. So he offers a number of things. Let's list them in modern terms, all right? Supposing you had a fleet of cars. Maybe that doesn't appeal to you, but there's some people who collect them. Maybe you say unlimited wealth, all right? Many people are struggling throughout the world to earn a living and to improve their lifestyle for various reasons. You want to educate your children better. You want a more comfortable existence. You want to save some money for old age, retirement, and so on. So there are many good reasons why you should have wealth. There are many good reasons why you should have food. But that doesn't mean to say you have to eat all the time. And if you have wealth, it doesn't mean to say that you have to use it over and above your basic needs. Simple living, high thinking is what's required. So, supposing now you win the lotto. You know that story I often told, at the risk of boring you, I'll tell it again, you see, of the man whose business went completely down into ruin, wreck and ruin. Every day he prayed to God, Lord, Lord, let me win the lotto. Eventually went to such great despair, he became atheistic. My prayer is of no value. He shook his fist at the heavens. I no longer believe in you. You've let me down. The clouds rolled forward and a voice boomed forth. Oh, my dear fellow, my dear child, at least buy a lotto ticket. So we have to do at least something. Now, supposing you do win this lotto, let's say you have 5 million euros. It's a modest amount in today's terms. What will you do with it? Now we'll add another complication. The doctor has just told you you have 2 weeks to live. So 2 weeks to spend this money. What will you do? Each person will answer in their own way. The chances are the money will be squandered. The money will be used to fulfill what is popularly now called a bucket list. So it's not just about expensive buckets either. It's a whole list of things that you intend to do. Of course, 2 weeks, we can maybe extend it and say, okay, you have 3 years, and then see what you do. And in 3 years, what will you build? Most people will forget. They'll live their life in a different way. I was listening this afternoon to a radio program, and there was a man who was saying, I anticipate that I'll live till 92 years of age, and I have a certain clock, and every day it winds down the time. Am I a pessimist? No, I'm a realist, because it gives me an understanding of how much I can do within that period of time. But will I do anything to promote my happiness? Or will I follow all the temptations that are offered Nachiketa? Any other person who had not the faith of Nachiketa would have taken up all the avenues of pleasure. The problem is that the avenues of pleasure are the sense organs. The sense organs move outwards. So we might say that the presence of the visible world has basically got pain involved in it. The objects bring us difficulties, as well as pleasures, as well as joy. How to make sure we have the one and not the other. And behind it all, behind the whole visible universe, is the basic fear of death. We don't want to cease to exist. So that when you combine these two things, satisfying the sense organs outwardly and the fear of death inwardly that we conveniently ignore, then we compound our difficulties, is the idea. John of the Cross decided, along with Teresa of Avila and so on, that they would take a step to control the senses. But it's not all negative, because on the other side there were meditating people. What does that mean? If consciousness, which is your birthright, is flowing through the sense organs to the outside, and the objects are giving you some difficulties, then is there a scientific, systematic process where you can stop that flow going outwards? Supposing you're able to poise it in some way. In that poised moment, would you be dissociating from would be severing the connection with pain, as the Bhagavad Gita suggests? Yes, you would. Because all this efferent and afferent current is dependent on a series of things going on. It's not just that there are objects and that the senses catch them. The brain has to interpret them. The mind has to receive them. The mind finds delight in them. And the intellect says, wait, let me go on what the Kathopanishad refers to as the preferable path, rather than the pleasurable path. Let me apply my discernment and wisdom in order to access something much deeper. And so, if we are to engage in a scientific process and withhold the hand, as it were, instead of it being put into a pocket, to pick up the things from the pocket, take it out from the pocket, engage your attention, withdraw it and employ it elsewhere into something that is steady, something that is permanent. Why don't you do that? Why don't you cultivate that practice? Then you will have overcome all the pain and difficulty, and you would have accessed happiness. In the words of the Upanishads, you would have overcome grief. And so there's a passage in the Kathopanishad that illustrates this beautifully. Indriyanam pradag bhavam udayastva mayo chayat pradag utpadyama manam matva dhira na shuchati. Knowing the separate nature of the senses. Separate nature of the senses from what? Knowing the separate nature of the senses from this poised entity, this poised condition. If you are able to do that, having known that there is a dissimilarity of the senses that originates separately from this entity that is there, as also their rising and their setting, two things. The person who has applied their intelligence and their inner wisdom, that person doesn't grieve, doesn't engage in unhappiness, always has access to happiness and joy. So, from where are the sense organs produced? They are produced by certain creative waves. And we've just done a meditation that illustrates it. These waves have a creative force. And what we call thought has got an inherent insight. And that insight contains certain powers. That is what we call thought. These manifest themselves progressively, starting off from the first cosmic movement. We call this Om, and we have this Om here in front of you. That cosmic movement then manifests itself as something that we call space, interpreted like that. A potential area where things can flow through in a subtle way, and it has two bifurcated aspects of it. It produces all vibrations. What is this entire universe? It is nothing more than grace, divine grace, expressed as waves. We can't catch the waves, we can't see the waves. These are subtle vibrations. But scientists can come close to it. They can infer that there are some subtle oscillations. And they can give these oscillations various names, but they're all concepts based in the working, waking material world, the concrete world of tables and chairs and bodies. That's the nearest we can get to it. But can we experience it? Can we withdraw and go back to this poised area, step by step, like going up a ladder? I'm referring to our meditation we've just done. Can we withdraw sufficiently where we can access the very highest part of our nature and the very highest part of the cosmos itself? And with each step, we find a broadening, we find things are more immense, more subtle, more truthful, and less engaged in the area of problems for us, which is the outside in the field. So Vedantic studies take these waves, series of waves, and they describe them as 5 basic elements. Mahaputas, Tanmatras. Anything that we find in front has got these 5 characteristics. Of course, there may be more, but we're unable to register anything because we only have 5 photographs of the world around us. The basic one is sound. So to us, universe is an area of sounds. And as far as we can analyze, we find out that these sound waves are there. By themselves, they have no meaning. They don't produce an experience of sound. The experience of sound has to come from an entity that has no similarity with it. Now you start seeing what the passage means. Having known the dissimilarities of the senses that originate separately from all these elements, and these elements are just the outflowing of a divine grace with permutations and combinations. So that when St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, when they sit down and systematically withdraw the senses from their objects, knowing that as they go increasingly inward, discovering more and more of these aspects of grace, they find a poised area which is full of bliss. Otherwise, why would they go on day after day, night after night? St. John of the Cross was persecuted by monks. Imagine. They kidnapped him and said, "We don't like all your reforms. We prefer a monastic life of luxury. We think you're going too far." So they put him in what was the equivalent of a jail. And they fed him meager food. And they whipped him daily in front of all the other monks. Humiliated him. Calmly he took it. And he registers, "This was the most valuable period of my life." Imagine. So going through this pain, he wasn't unhappy. Imagine. Having had this poise of withdrawing the mind, as it were, into the highest subtle areas, he learned the art. And then, of course, he writes the most beautiful poems. There's a book here I have in front of me called Living Flame of Love. He's dealing with 4 of these stanzas and a whole commentary on these stanzas. I probably won't go into it this evening, but suffice to say that these beautiful expressions of poetry came from his inner experience, from the mystic area. And we have this expression, the dark night of the soul. It all belongs to St. John, John of the Cross. So, our knowing instruments are only these 5. But it says, separately produced from the basic energy is really what it means. We can say that God's will or God's creative power, whose first wave system will bifurcate into all sounds and all ears that catch it, all skins, all pressures, all eyes, all things that can be seen and all things that radiate, all things that are fluid, all tastes, all mouths that catch it, all scents and smells, and all noses that catch it. In their gross form, in their subtle form, it is only one of gradation. It's like a grace flowing and condensing in one place. And we registered this one place as, oh, it's a body, it's a you and it's me, it's the eyes, it's the ears, it's the mouth, it's the personality. So when we look at happiness, we can look at it in the physical sense. Where are we going wrong? The body, if we attach to the body, then we won't be happy, there's no doubt. But why should there be an urge for happiness in the first place? If the urge and movement toward it is not there, life will stop. It stops unfolding, stops evolving. We can't have an interview with an amoeba and say, "Can you tell me why you want to survive?" We can't interview a whole bunch of bacteria, line them up and say, "Dear bugs, can you please tell me why you want and need to survive?" We can't take a number of cells and say, "Why did you want to combine and make a cooperative called a living organism with the aim of surviving and reproducing, replicating?" So we have to speculate that within all these creatures is an urge to continue their existence. That means the fundamental basis must be existence itself. And then, how do we know? How do we know what to do? How do we know what to eat? If eating wasn't enjoyable, we wouldn't do it. If replicating wasn't enjoyable, we wouldn't do it. So based on this expression, external expression of some inward essence, and so this essence is a kind of intelligence, a knowing. And everything has it. If you take a rock and put it on a string, it knows where the center of the earth is. Don't tell me it doesn't. It knows where gravity is and the center of gravity is. When atoms fly off, they know, electrons know, not to dive into the center of the proton. They know how to combine and how to avoid, how to respond to gravity and how not to. A tree, a plant, knows where the sun is. A bird knows how to navigate. I don't think it went on any workshop or course to teach it. Some of the birds have magnetite in the brain. Some of the birds don't have it. And scientists today are scratching their heads to find out, how does a bird know how to navigate? Some weeks ago, I mentioned a certain bird that was discovered in North America, and they put a tracking device and found it migrates all the way to South America, from North America to South America, and doesn't do it at the same time because they stay in order to avoid hurricane season. And then meteorologists come out and make a prediction about there will be no hurricanes, and hurricanes are there. And the birds know. They must be thinking, these meteorologists have no idea. And so they forestall their migration. And when the hurricane is over, they then migrate. This is still a mystery. But it gets clarified when you understand that behind it is this intelligence. The knower sits behind all the knowings. And the combination of these is urging forward. Let me find what is my perpetual existence. Let me find what is my perpetual ultimate knowledge. Let us find my home where consciousness is pouring through everything. Let me find the source, the fountain of where it's pouring from. And let me discover the source of happiness. Let me find it. Let me see what is the most blissful area that I can manage. And so, these are separately produced from the basic energy, says this passage in the Kathopanishad. In all these directions they go. First, as we said, comes this primordial source of sound that we call Akasha. It's a wave system of God's grace. That's all we can say. It is divine grace. It produces these two movements that I've mentioned. The same goes for the next technical term of Vayu. It produces all pressures and skins to register them. It is all variations of this divine grace expressing it. So that when you look at an object, or you look at the body, which is also an object, then our first analysis would be, what is it that we see? And then go a little further. 5 areas of perception. What is behind them? Then progressively, you can reduce one each time. You can take the smell alone, for example, is seen and the smell is caught by the nostrils, but behind that is the taste. And behind that is the sight. The taste buds, behind that is something else. form and sight then, and behind that something else, until you get to the creative purpose and creative will. And do this a million times until you can do it easily and naturally, until you can glide across the border of all the divisions and come to that one central point. And their nature of being essentially dissimilar to the nature of the self that is extremely pure, absolute in consciousness alone, says the commentator. The self is constant. These other things are variable. See, there's a creature called a spider. It's an amazing creature. A spider can produce a web without a lady spider. It doesn't have to go and marry a Mrs. Spider in order to produce the web. From itself, it produces it. And from that, we can understand. If you move toward the spider, the conscious element, it moves. When you poke the web, it just bounces. One is fixed, insentient. The other is sentient. There is a dissimilarity between the two. That's the example we can give. You can break the web, you can tear it away, but the spider is intelligent. The thing that is produced of it, the thread, nothing. Like fingernails, you can clip them off. Hair, you can clip them off. It doesn't do you any harm. I know that because I have a beard. When somebody clips the beard, I say, whoa, wait, all that DNA going to waste, let me keep it. And then, similarly knowing they're rising and setting, says the passage. What does that mean? We see all the time birth, life, and death, creation and dissolution. It's a pattern of the whole cosmos. It's our own pattern as well. But here, there's a subtle philosophical lesson. Because we don't only have one state of consciousness, that is the state of creation, but we also have other states as well. And we see as soon as the eyes close, as soon as we drift into a sleep state, where do the senses go? They start setting, along with the setting sun. The internal thing is always looking. Internal eyes are the eyes of perception. And so, when you dream, you hardly notice the difference. You just cross the border, nicely glide across the border, not knowing anything more. The physical object glides away like water, the things that are giving you a problem. And the perceiving instrument continues vibrating internally, but we hardly notice it. And then the physical body itself drops off from our consciousness when we fall asleep. The entire physical world drops off. The internal world comes alive and it's there. And when a person undergoes that experience, which we call death, every night we're having a dress rehearsal for it. All the consciousness of the body is gone. All the sense organs are gone that produce all our difficulties. Until we declare, I had a peaceful sleep. Why? Because we went into a state of potentiality, a state of creative consciousness about to spring forward. And the same thing happens in the universe itself. So when a person undergoes the experience called death, he will still be living mentally. Nothing we should fear. It means living really. And that really is one's real life. Only the external thing through which we look gets dropped off, and we find all the unhappiness dropping off with it. And that is why the expression na shochati goes beyond this level of grief and unhappiness. It's like a person looking through a telescope. You can look at a telescope, you feel that you're coherent when the telescope is taken away. You don't feel you have been taken away. Nothing happened to you. And when the person's physical telescope, the body, also gets removed and taken away, you hardly feel any difference. Why should you? It's exactly like gliding across into dream. And the daily dream, therefore, is a foretaste of what will happen. So that even the most frightening mythological figures of death mounted on a buffalo cart can't do anything more than what is being done to you daily. That philosophical attitude is a good preparation ground for stabilizing the moods. So a coherent condition where all future things, which could be exhibited separately, all find a unity of existence. And these three stages that I mentioned, these three states of consciousness, of waking and dreamless sleep, are normally misinterpreted. In relation to the waking and sleep states, the rising and the setting of the sense organs, that is what is mentioned. So let us delve into more and more the commentary on this. So for the purpose of perceiving, says the commentary, their own respective objects, knowing through discrimination, their difference, their nature of being essentially dissimilar to the nature of the self that is extremely pure, absolute, and consciousness alone. Similarly, knowing their udayastamayo, rising and setting, creation and dissolution in relation to the waking and sleeping states, as belonging to them and not to the self. Dhiraha, the intelligent person, nashotati, does not grieve, for the constantly uniform nature of the self being unchanging, the self cannot be the cause of sorrow. Similar, there's another Vedic text contained in the Chandogya Upanishad. It says, the know of the self crosses over sorrow. So the self in relation to which the dissimilarity of the senses has been pointed out is not to be realized outside, for it's the inmost self of all. The next passage answers a good question. How can that be? Well, there's a ranking order, a kind of ladder we can ascend. There's something that is superior to the senses. It is the mind. And there's something superior to the mind, it is the intellect. And there's something superior to that, it is the one universal cosmic mind, almost equivalent to the personal God. If you ask somebody, can you give me a definition of God as is understood commonly in religion, they will say, it is something like a cosmic mind, something like a creative mind. This universe came from a creative mind. That is superior. But then the unmanifest is superior to that. That is really what we call the unmanifest aspect of it, which is something in a state of equilibrium, a state of poise. We can compare it in the human experience to a dreamless sleep and the eruption into forms as this first mahat, this first creative impulse, what we call this God. And then that crystallizes as our human body with its experiences and the 5 avenues of the senses. An astute mind will understand the oneness going through it, all of it, and expressing itself. Something like a plant or a flower opening. A little bit opens, more opens, more opens, more opens, until the whole thing is opened. We can't say that it was in any way separate. We can't say that the stem was separate from the bud. We can't say that the bud was separate from the first opening. We can't say that it was different from the full blooming. It's one thing. And superior even to that, therefore, even to that unmanifested, is that Supreme Purusha. This is some of the things we've gone through on Saturday in discussing the Kathopanishad. This very passage has been gone through. And this Purusha, who is pervasive and is indeed without worldly attributes, knowing whom a man becomes freed and attains immortality. When the five senses of knowledge come to rest together with the mind and the intellect too does not function, that state they call the highest. That is the most blissful state, of course, that we have. So we can see that this rising and setting is to do with these three states of consciousness. For the constantly uniform nature of the self being unchangeable, says the commentary, the self cannot be the cause of sorrow. Who can inflict sorrow upon a unity, really, is the question. You can't do it. So when the totality is there, unless you've got a second totality coming to knock it, you can't cause pain. Totality alone being there, there's no second which can inflict pain. Nothing can penetrate it. The self in relation to the dissimilarity of the senses, says the commentary, as has been pointed out, is not to be realized outside. Why? Because it is the innermost self, not just of you, but of all. It is the kingdom of heaven within. It is that which was experienced by Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and others. The mind is superior to the senses, and so it goes on. When the mind is controlled, of course, then the sense organs become controlled. If you want to control a whole hive of bees, take the queen bee and transport it somewhere else, and all the other bees will follow. So this control of the mind is there, and we call this generally spiritual practice. And the more intensely you practice, with the greater love that you practice, over and over again. Practice means doing the same thing, time and time and time again, until it becomes smooth, until it becomes habitual, effortless. But we start somewhere. We have to keep up our enthusiasm about it, understanding that the alternative is sorrow, grief, unhappiness. The sense organs are controlled not by deliberate flight, but by taking the mind and putting it in a much more interesting place. If we are content with this garden, if you like, of ups and downs and sorrows and flowers and thorns, this dichotomy which is there, and we say, okay, life is a roller coaster, and we accept it, then of course we can't have the vision of a better place, a better world anyway, a better condition. And so we have to rehearse these principles. We have to get this conviction that it is so. This is the value of the scripture. And so in an ascending order of values, the Upanishad gives us that one can merge into the other, that can merge into the other, and so on. And the mind that enjoys so much has to be subject to the intellect, which has to put something out and say, no, wait, I want something more permanent. I want something better. I want something more lasting, immortal, homogeneous. I want peace. And these persuasive directions from the intellect will persuade the mind ultimately. That is the point of making this gradation until we arrive at the cosmic mind. This is the whole of meditation too. The whole of meditation is to take the existing status quo, dissolve it into something more subtle and higher. Dissolve that, dissolve that, dissolve that, dissolve that. Going up, as it were, a ladder. And we're free, once we know it, we are free to ascend and descend as we want, in a joyful way. There's a commentary to this passage which is worth reading. The sense objects belonging to the same class as they do with the senses, because they're built from the same materials. What you call the eye and the ear and so on and so forth are objects seen by the mind, but they're also made from the objects themselves. They're made from the food. The wheat that you see, or the transposed wheat into bread that you see and purchase in the supermarket, it becomes the I as soon as it enters into the stomach. As soon as your milk that is taken separately in a separate glass gets put into the stomach, from there on, it's no longer milk, it's body. It's the same thing. And so that is worth enumerating then, and that's why it is done. Superiority of this and then that, and then the next thing, and so on. Stage by stage, we reach the Atman. And we do this in the arena of time and space and enjoy the dance that is going on. So, there is a number of passages that exaggerate the necessity to clean the mind. That's another way of saying to refine the senses so they look at things in a different way, a new way, looking at the wave sitting behind it, directing it ultimately to a cosmic mind somewhere. When the five senses of knowledge come to rest together with the mind, and the intellect too doesn't function, that state is called the highest. So once we've understood that the intellect has been firmly grounded upon the fact that there's only one pure existence that we can call God. God alone is there and nothing else is there. And that is only a wave system. What we view is there objectively is only a wave system. And that the waves can be released by the player playing the music of this cosmos. Once we understand that, then the intellect needn't be put on a special duty, which says, see that this waking Swami has disappeared. No more than, in my example of a Shakespearean play, will we say that Hamlet disappeared. No, Hamlet was never there in the first place. It was just a role that was played by the Shakespearean actor on the stage. Irving was always there. The Shakespearean actor was always there. So that's the yoga, that state which is the highest. Making all the sense organs along with their portfolios and the mind and the intellect settle down, totally convinced that this is the sum total of the ocean. We have to look at the totality. Somebody asked me in a text, I realize what you say now, that you say you don't set goals. Is purpose and goals different? And then another person in a discussion today said, but in business life, we have to set goals. Yes, but set goals and leave them. If I want to climb a mountain, I set the goal, I say, top of the mountain, that has to be reached. All right. If I'm obsessed about it, I'll stumble and fall on the journey. Imagine climbing a challenging mountain, something like Everest. Has now become a popular thing for many people to do. I have to wait for the weather, I have to have some patience and so on. But if my concentration is all the time, let me reach the top, I'll miss the danger of a crevasse. Now our journey is much easier than that. We have the opportunity of enjoying the adventure itself, of discovering the flora and fauna, of finding the happiness in this present moment. Once we understand its intrinsic value, once we understand that behind everything is only this one existence. And so why don't I tune in to the totality which is there? Instead of making a separation and saying, I'll get to the top, either now or in a post-mortem condition. Generally, most people say in a post-mortem condition. Instead of being anxious about that, why don't I take this here and now and go on my adventure with a sense of joy, dancing through life? This sense of poise on the one hand and the sense of engaging in the adventurous play of life on the other will produce this happiness that I'm seeking. There's a passage in the Bhagavatam also, which is worth reading as a translation. It's referring to the 10th skanda, 80th chapter, stanzas 3 and 4. Very inspiring. It says, that alone is the real faculty of speech which is used for reciting the Lord's glorious attributes and his glories. How much time we waste in scandling or worrying or arguing or doubting. Those alone are real hands which are used for the service of the Lord. That alone is the real mind which contemplates on the Lord as dwelling in everything. Not only in oneself or an image, everything. And that alone is the real power of hearing which is utilized for listening to the description of the Supreme Being. Again, that alone is the real head which bows down before the two symbols of the Lord. What are these two symbols? His image in a shrine and his devotees. It's the same. See, the Vaishnavite is very particular because God will be very much pleased, not when you go and say, your eyes are wrong. Your nose is long. But when you go and serve his devotees. So the man puts a mark, the Vaishnavite does it. I'm a devotee of God, and serve him. Knowing that he's a devotee. Whatever is in your power to give, you serve him, you give it. You do that. That's the equivalent of serving God. An image of the temple is not sentient. But the devotee is made from not bricks and mortar, not metal and stone, but flesh and blood. You can find out what is behind the image in meditation. But the person who inaugurates a temple is a holy person. When he makes a practice of meditation, he brings it alive. And that temple image then becomes sanctified. That's the process. It emanates a power. There's no doubt about that. But it's much easier to come across God's devotees. It's an easier way. The temple is already built and the inauguration already complete. So those who want to love God and try to reach him, why don't we serve them? That's quite enough. They're both equal. So we have to study some of these texts, in this case the Bhagavatam, to understand this practical aspect of worship, that is service to God's devotees and service to God are all identical. If God cannot be God conveniently for dealing with him, take his devotees. Then it goes on to say, they alone are the real limbs which become purified by the waters with which the feet of holy images and holy men are washed. So you see, when you say, for example, in Indian fashion, touch the feet of somebody, something like that, take the dust of the feet, wash the feet, any of these expressions, it looks very awkward sometimes. But then you see, there's a book called, another book which is called The Saints of the Fathers. It's a very small book. It's a Jewish book, actually. And there you'll find in the earliest chapter, in section 1, that you must take the wise man to your house and take the dust off his feet. That's an old Jewish custom, not just an Indian custom. So why not see the person who's in the church or the synagogue or the temple or a public place where everybody can meet him, that's more formal even. Take him to your house, You can be free with him there, get the wisdom more directly from him when he is at ease, not in a formal way, but in a synagogue or in a church or a temple. But take him to your house so everybody can meet comfortably and take the dust of his feet. And more so, Jesus washed the feet of his own disciples. Peter objected. And then Jesus said, well, if you object, have nothing more to do with me. And Peter says, oh, in that case, wash my whole body. So this is the practical side of this, that if the sum totality is to be found anywhere, it is to be found principally in the hearts of the devotees. Now, if you wash the feet of somebody first, how will you take the dust from the feet afterward? Well, you can't do that. Dust would have been washed off by that time. And so take the dust first is the custom, and then do the washing. Anyway, the human ears that have not listened to recitals of divine glory are just mere caves, says the Bhagavatam, continuing. So they only hear, it's not really a cave echoing. And the voices of men who have not sung of it are mere croakings of frogs. That's a poetic description, no doubt. A person who cannot speak of God's glory but talks about everything else is just like a frog croaking. In Zimbabwe, we have a place called Kwekwe, and it's spelled Q-U-E, or used to be. And then once the African independence came, they changed the whole thing because they changed many place names, just as, we want to replace colonial names such as, Tiruchirappalli, Trichinopoli, we go back to Tiruchirappalli and so on, things like that. In this case, they changed the spelling to KWE, and changed all the stamps and changed all the place names and street names and letterheads and what have you. But it's actually just the sound of a frog. I don't suppose the frogs know that they should have spelt it with a K instead of a Q. So all this is meaningless, you see, unless we really put the heart into it, is the point. A man's head, though decorated with a silken turban, says the Bhagavatam, is a mere burden to wear if it is not accustomed to bowing down to the Lord. His arms, though wearing shining golden ornaments, are purposeless like those of a corpse if they are not used in the service of the Lord or the service of his devotees. The eyes that are not accustomed to seeing divine images or devotees' needs are equal to the eyes of a peacock feather, and the legs of people who do not walk to and go round holy places are comparable to trees. They also stand supporting things. A man who has never touched the holy dust sanctified by the feet of the devotees of the Lord is equal to a living corpse, and he who has not smelt the fragrance of tulsi leaves from the feet of the holy images of Vishnu is a veritable breathing corpse. This is the Bhagavatam. These are very strong passages, worthy of study and understanding. The practical implication of seeing and tuning in to the flowing glory and grace of the divine, that if we have through practice an eye to see it, we will see it everywhere, not only in formal meditation, but also whatever the eyes are light on, whatever the ears are light on, whatever the skin attunes to in the atmosphere. So with these few words, I'll leave this off now. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.